when you look at Germany,
Yep.
Germany, like the United States, has been at the vanguard. I think they're the third or fourth largest economy in the world. They seem to have done much better in this transition than the United States. What comparative structural experience, what kind of inferences can you draw from their performance relative to ours in recent years?
Well, I'm kind of in mid-process in that. So I can tell you what the data says, because we do have the data. So we did the same study on Germany. And it's quite interesting. You know, the global and technological forces are similar. These are two advanced economies, technologically and in other ways advanced. And you see similar patterns. You know, you actually see manufacturing employment decline, but not as much. And the most striking difference when you look at Germany over the last 15 or so, 20 years, is the tradable sector remained an employment engine. It didn't have to generate as much employment. It wasn't out of balance in the same way ours was. Now, the thing that I think is important to say, Rob, is that the Germans had a huge productivity and self-identified productivity and competitiveness problem around 2000. They were about 10 years into sort of absorbing East Germany, major dislocations. They'd absorbed them at par, so to speak, you know,
right,
with one-to-one exchange rate. And that process, you know, had done all kinds of that, plus rigid labor institutions, things that had worked okay for them in the post-war recovery period were starting to really bite. And they were being hurt rather than helped by the global economy. And in the period after 2000, they really went to work on this. I guess the political leader would be Gerhard Schroeder, but the unions and the major businesses were involved, and they focused on competitiveness and employment. They worked out agreements that increased flexibility in the labor market, allowed them to outsource things that made sense, but keep things where they were close. They have a larger advanced manufacturing sector, relatively speaking, than we do, not in absolute terms, a smaller economy. And they appear to have addressed directly the income distribution question as well. They said, look, if we're going to have to restore competitiveness, some kind of restraint in terms of wage and income growth, it needs to be restraint that runs across the whole spectrum.
Shared sacrifice.
Shared sacrifice, in a way. And so, you know, I'm going to go interview in the next month or so a lot of the major players who were involved in this. I'm sure they'll have different views, and Chancellor Schroeder lost the election after it was done, so it wasn't necessarily a hit politically, but it's had an enormous effect on Germany's resilience in the crisis and after, and so on. Now, that's not to say Germany won't be hurt if, you know, the current chaos and risk in Europe gets out of hand, but so it's not bulletproof. But it's pretty well positioned competitively and in the tradable sector for a good run, and it was hard work.
I know at our last conference in Bretton Woods, there was a scholar, Dalia Marin. She has done work on the supply chains between Germany and Austria on the one hand and the Eastern European countries on the other, and found a leveling effect on the distribution of income.
Yes.
Because there were highly skilled people who were brought on stream, like you mentioned, East Germany, but also Slovakia, Poland, parts of Hungary, Russia, where very highly trained scientists and engineers could participate and be integrated.
In these supply chains. That's absolutely right. Now, I think in some ways what you're seeing is that writ large in the global economy. I mean, we've had, if you think of the global economy as the sort of modern economy in this world, we've had literally hundreds of millions of entrants. They enter initially in a relatively unskilled capacity and in an environment where the productivity enhancing sort of supports around infrastructure and everything else is pretty limited. But then they move. And they move up in terms of the technology base, up in terms of value added, and they impact a larger fraction of the advanced country's population. I think what you just described in that research is exactly right. And in some sense, you got to choose. I mean, either that or you isolate yourself from the global economy. But then, if you try to do that, then you pay a price in terms of, the cost of goods you buy.
Well, what I see from talking with you and reading your book is that there is an awareness of structure that is global and one has to be mindful of. So it seemed to me it would be a great hazard not to read this book, and it would be a great hazard to turn one's mind away from the consequences of inevitability and the stresses and forces and evolution of the global environment. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for shedding light on all these processes. We look forward to everyone reading this, and we look forward to people following your work in the days to come.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.